don't know if Dr. Mendenhall actually remembers me, but I remember her as a doctoral student. She gave a lecture, I believe at UIC, and she was the first person who ever talked about racial microaggressions and racialized assaults using intersectionality, right?
Yes.
I know today intersectionality is all the rage. Like that's everybody's middle name right now. But back in the day, it was like, well, we just confused. And Dr. Mendenhall laid it down. So sis, I've been following you for a while and I really, really appreciate you. So we don't give really long and it's her stuff is long and all elegant, right? So please do read the bio that Javon sent out to you. But I'm just going to simply say that Dr. Mendenhall is an associate professor of sociology, African American studies, urban and regional planning, gender and women's studies, and social work at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. Dang, you are doing a lot. So you embody intersectionality and interdisciplinary studies.
Yeah.
But I really love her work on Black mothers because, again, she's been doing Black mothers before studying Black women was a thing, right? Now it's a thing, but she was in it from the ground up and really understanding, trying to unpack the violent effects of Black mothers' mental and physical health using a variety of methods that she's going to dig into, including interviews, crime statistics, police reports. She even focuses on the earned income tax credits, y'all. Now tell me that ain't like everything, but I'm not even done. Social mobility, health outcomes, the medicalization of poverty. Do you see who we have in the house? So Dr. Mendenhall, we are just so excited to have you and just wanted you to just say a few introductory remarks. Then I have one question I want to ask you about your MacArthur proposal. Then we'll go into your PowerPoint and then hopefully the chat will have just blown all the way up and we'll do Q&A.
Yes, so hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation. And Ebony, I want to say I love your work too, and it's really important to some things that I'm thinking about. So thank you for that. And you're right when you talk about just kind of interdisciplinary. And I'm trying to even see the origins of how I became so interdisciplinary, but maybe it'll come out as I talk some. But I definitely believe in having questions and saying, okay, how can I answer these questions? And then not being bounded by one discipline, right? To see who has a piece of the puzzle and if they can work together, because I found that some people have been working on the piece for years, for 20 years, right? Where I couldn't reproduce their knowledge, their expertise, but we can join together and produce something that really is quite extraordinary. So I'll try to take you on that journey, and even from my background and my family and how that kind of influences my research as well. So I am happy to be here.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad we had a chance to correspond before this and you telling me about the MacArthur proposal. Because oftentimes I hear, particularly from women of color, MacArthur's not checking for me.
Ooh.
And I'm like, somebody got to get it.
Yeah.
Why be us,
Yeah. So that's
yeah. Go
yes.
go ahead. Go right ahead. Can you tell us a little bit about your proposal? And also if you could talk a little bit about collaborations, because it seems like with MacArthur, collaborations is a big part of the initiative.
Yeah. So great. Yeah. So it's interesting. And I'll tell you, I think I wrote a proposal for MacArthur before that wasn't funded, but like 2 years ago, they had this proposal for the $100 million. What is it, 100 million and change? Do people remember that? Right? So Taraji P. Henson at the time started the Henson Foundation, right, named after her father. And she invited me to speak on Black mothers. And there were other mental health professionals that I met there. And I told them, I said, you know what? MacArthur has this grant for $100 million. And I was thinking about this idea of building up the Black mental health ecosystem. What do you all think? Do you want to be a part of it? And everybody I asked was like, yeah, okay. So we ended up with the Association of Black Psychiatrists, the Black Psychiatric Association. If I'm saying it right, I always mix it up. We just hit like all of these like 10 organizations, and we submitted the grant. And some people, right, was like, oh, why would you spend your time doing that, right? MacArthur isn't looking for what you're trying to do. And some others, it was even at like almost the 11th hour, it seems like we weren't going to do it. And some was like, oh, you should just stop. You should. No, right? Like we came this far, we're going to go. So we did it, we submitted, and we advanced 2 rounds. So I'm assuming it was impressive that we were able to advance. We were not selected into that final 100. And so then the group still met, right? Those in the Association of Black Psychologists and others. And then MacArthur came and they said, you know what? I remember that work you were doing with Black mothers. And I was like, yeah. And they said, we're interested in Black youth, or they didn't say Black youth, they're interested in youth mental health in Chicago. And I said, oh, it's interesting. I'm working on a project now with young people. So I just gave them stuff that I was doing already. And then they asked me to submit a full proposal that we just submitted Friday, and hopefully we'll know something soon. Yeah. And you talk about collaboration. I pulled in everything because in the title of my talk today, I talk about this idea of an emerging renaissance in community science. So I really want this project to be kind of the foundation for creating healing in communities of color. So we're working with 50 Black and Latinx students to develop a community health workers training, a citizen science training. And my goal is to train 100,000 community health workers in the US and maybe even internationally, but to really deal with issues around mental health and physical health, and to understand stress, right, and racial trauma and all of that, and how the intersectional oppressions and how that really literally can create early death in different groups. So thank you for asking about that. No, and I pulled in, right, part of community science is to have many departments at a university working on it. So I pulled in the Center for Design, I pulled in the medical school, African American Studies, urban and regional planning, and then I pulled in other institutions, University of Chicago, Northwestern, and all of those individuals, again, to do what NSF is calling like this convergent science, right? Kind of looking at this problem around health and well-being, but from different perspectives. So that's the MacArthur grant that we're going to hopefully get. And if not MacArthur, right, the ideas there, we're going to work and do that work anyway.
That's right. That's right. You hear that, scholars? If it's not MacArthur, which it will be, because we just gonna claim it.
I appreciate that.
Yes, we can shop that baby around. We're not done. We're not done. And I'm so happy you talked about premature death, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about this Thursday with the same crew is don't work yourself to death. Don't do
it. Yeah. I mean, even I have to really think about that. And I did. I took some bold, drastic steps that I will have a research scientist and a project manager starting, because like you listed all that, and it was a lot, right? It was a lot. So
it's a lot. Yeah. But having those multiple perspectives is so important, because being a person of color is hella complicated, right? And these simplistic notions are just really messing us up. Well, we would like you to dive right on into your PowerPoint. If you look at the chat, people are really excited to have you today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yes, systems and ecological theory, right? So even genomics, right? From genomics to society. And part of the MacArthur proposal was to have a policy clinic. And Senator Hunter has agreed to work with us when she's not in the General Assembly. And we're hoping to get someone from the Latino caucus. So really thinking about these issues, having community members come. These are some of the struggles. So this is the law, it was passed. Let me tell you how implementation is working and what do we need to tweak or to think about. So yes, all levels, at all levels. So I will share my PowerPoint. And definitely feel free to interrupt and ask questions. I do not mind. Okay, can everybody see one slide? Okay, good. And let me just set my timer because I do want to respect the time. So I always put this slide up since COVID and just acknowledging our essential workers and what they do to keep us safe. And I put Dr. King's quote up too, and hoping that one day the dignity will also mean economic dignity in terms of higher pay. And then this slide, I put it up when we were having the mass shootings. And I just kind of shifted a little today to include some of the recent events in Chicago that I almost couldn't finish a meeting because of some of this news that has been coming out. So today, right, I think it was this morning, early in the morning in Chicago, there was a mass shooting for those who haven't heard. And I think when I read it, it was 4 people were killed, 4 were injured. And, you know, and my heart just goes out to individuals who are in those communities where that happens and you're trying to raise your children. My heart goes out to the mothers. And then just a couple of other stories. A 14-year-old boy, his mother or family saved up enough money. They're moving to the suburbs. They were loading up the car and the 14-year-old child was shot and killed. And we're even working on a paper now where we talk about mothers feeling trapped, right? Where they want to get out, but they don't have enough money to move and what that's doing to their system when I talk about genomics and revving it up. So when I saw that, I was, again, it's just heartbreaking and takes your breath away. And then another young male who attempted to end his life. I'm trying to say it right, so please correct me with the language, right? Because due to bullying, and 2 years later, he actually passed away recently from some of his injuries, as I understand it. I'm sorry, and then one more stat is, so this report came out June 10th, and as of June 10th, there were 31 children shot in Chicago. Right, and my mouth just, my mind just can't believe it when you think about, on average, a little less than 2 children are shot anywhere, but it's in Chicago. So again, as I talk about this community science, this community health worker, in the midst of COVID, in the midst of police violence, in the midst of protests, right, you have this other layer, and how do we both capture what it does to you mentally and physically, but then also not just to capture it for knowledge's sake, how do you transform that knowledge into healing and policy? So I'll kind of talk about my background, right? My mixed methods and interdisciplinary researcher, kind of how I came to be such a thing. And then I'll talk about some of my projects. Feel free to ask me questions about others, but the South Chicago one, this project, Big Data, Recovering Black Women's Lost History. And then this project I'm working on with over 10 million tweets. And there's another project. So I was in a meeting earlier today that we're starting looking at the Spanish flu and then how that, like how people passed away in certain geographic areas, how that may be related to COVID, and how Blacks who migrated from the South in the early 1900s and where they settled, how those places still have high levels of death. And that just shows the continuity of racial oppression from slavery to the migration, to the redlining, to the Black Belt. And then I'll try to talk about the impact of my research on young people. And then this idea, right, that I'm starting to put together, bold and audacious, I know, about a third Reconstruction. The first one being the end of slavery, second one after Brown versus Board of Education and the Jim Crow and civil rights laws. And then this third one possibly in this moment. And then this emerging Renaissance. And it kind of, this idea of community science, again, having many people looking at this issue and scaling things up in a way where we haven't scaled them up before. So in terms of family, this is an image of my grandmother who was at a talk with Dr. King in Camden. I'm Selma, Alabama. My family is from Camden, Alabama. And this here is her sister, who's my great aunt. And when she was young, she took care of her grandmother, who was an enslaved human in the South. And she told her stories that she then passed on to me. And I'll tell you, when she was telling the story, she was crying. When I heard the stories, I was crying. And then when I would tell people the stories, right, they were crying. So I mean, it's just takes your breath away, and not a good way. But part of the motivation that I think about, right, because the reason I was able to get those stories was that my interest is in, so what do we know about the slaves? Like, how did they keep their humanity? How did they survive these oppressive systems? And what ways is it the same, right, in many ways, and what ways is it different? And one thing, though, that my great-great-grandmother, her story isn't digitized, right? I can't look it up somewhere. Maybe she's in the WPA stories or something else, but to my knowledge, she's not. And so even when I do my big data research, that's part of what I'm trying to see. It goes from 1700s, like what have Black women said about their experiences in the US? And I'll tell you some of the findings about what we had to do to try to even answer that question. But part of the motivation are the women in my family, and the men too, their stories and how we don't have their stories. And it's such a loss. So my background, for those who don't know, I started, my undergrad degree was in occupational therapy. I love that profession. I worked in protective services. So I saw a lot of children who were abused. And that's also part of my interest in community health workers and working with young people, and how can we help them to deal with the trauma, right, that they experience, but also how can we help them to avoid it? And sometimes that may mean bringing healing to their family. And one of the things that motivated me to study policy was that mothers would, mostly Black and brown mothers, would say, my child isn't growing like it should because I can't afford to feed them. And so I'm watering down the formula, and that's why they're small. And for me, after I heard the story over and over, I was like, oh, okay. It's not about like, are they a good mother? Do we need to snatch the baby? We didn't use those words, but that certainly was what was coming across. And so I said, okay, it's not about the mothers, it's about society. And that's what led to my interest in public policy. Went to the Harris School, studied with mostly economists, graduated, went to work at the Ounce of Prevention Fund in Chicago, and worked with legislators, with child welfare, other forms. But I remember around the table, I was often the only Black female, and it was mostly white males, and they were committed. But I often thought about, well, where are the mothers that I heard about at Cook County? Why aren't they around the policy table trying to say what they needed change? So when I talk about this policy clinic, in some ways it stems from my question looking around the table and who was there, and then also at Cook County. So they had early Head Start grant. I went to Robert Taylor Homes to work as they implemented that. And when I left downtown, people were saying, who leaves downtown to go to Robert Taylor? Why would you want to do that? And I was trying to answer the question about what the mothers who were living in areas with high levels of crime, low income, who had children, like what did they need? How do you survive? What can be done to support you? So worked at Robert Taylor Homes. We talk, I work with young moms, have a love for teenage moms. And we would tell them, you know, you can create policy, right? You need someone to support it, but you can think of the ideas and what you need. And some of them would say, okay, but wrap this up because I need to meet so-and-so at whatever time to get some money to feed my babies. And so I was like, okay, here we go again with lack of money and how it's kind of driving what people are doing. So went back to school, studied human development and social policy, right? So trying to merge that. And I guess, right, so now you do have a sense of my interdisciplinary nature and where it came from and the places that I was in that informed it. And so when I graduated from Northwestern, I was interested in how economic outcomes, how neighborhoods influence mothers' economic outcomes. I did work on the Gautreaux housing program, right? Dr. King came to Chicago. They sued Chicago Housing and HUD, saying they intentionally discriminated against African Americans. It took 10 years to go through the courts. It made it to the Supreme Court. And after a whistleblower said, yeah, you know, we steer Black families to these type of homes, we steer white families over here to these type of homes. They ordered one of the biggest desegregation programs. So we looked at census data, welfare data, employment data to see how neighborhoods affected economic outcomes. Because again, that's what I was thinking about in Cook County and Robert Taylor. And it showed that when the women moved to predominantly white neighborhoods or more integrated neighborhoods, they did better economically. And based on the interviews, that was because they had more resources in terms of more jobs, and then also more places where the women could go to school and get additional resources. And then gun violence. I was here in Champaign-Urbana for a while and started hearing about gun violence and young people kind of doing some of the shooting and young people being shot. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how do the mothers do it, right? Like knowing that your child is in such danger like that. So that kind of turned my attention to looking at that, gun violence in neighborhoods. Any questions? Okay. And so again, as I talked about NSF with this convergent science, and so I've worked with biologists, designers, computer scientists, definitely community members, thinking about solutions to a lot of these issues. And I'm at the College of Medicine now, as Ebony said, and we do make-a-thons once a year where we invite anyone in Illinois, it could be children, to submit ideas around health and wellness. We do a dolphin tank, which is like Shark Tank, but it's kinder and gentler. And we select 10 winners and we give them $10,000 worth of resources to turn their idea into a prototype. So some wanted like some technology, trying to think of one of the technology ones. See where my, not interest, but my, one that's coming to mind is like stocking for people who have burns, right? It's hard to get the stocking on to start the healing process. So they were trying to work on one that would be activated with water and temperatures. Another idea, and one of the young people that I'm working with, he won one of the $10,000 coins recently. And his idea is to play classical music after shootings as a form of healing. So he's in 8th grade, soon to be in 9th grade, and he's leading the team. We're following him with this idea about how to do that. And he's a classically trained violinist too. So he's starting with his strengths. So I'll talk some about my research projects now. The Black Mothers Project, Recovering Lost History, and the 10 Million Tweets. And in terms of collaborations, so I'll give you a little bit about how they started. So this is Gene Robinson, the director of the Institute for Genomic Biology. The story goes, he came to sociology, right? So I'm in sociology, and he was asking the head at the time, like, what faculty did she know who would kind of be fearless, right? They were looking for someone to work with them, looking at genomics. And at the time, I was doing work with like C-reactive protein, or proposing, right? Nothing was getting funded, but writing proposals with C-reactive protein and other things. And so she said, yeah, you know, Ruby, I think she would be a great person. And so the rest is history. We started meeting. We had funding to bring people together for almost like a year, where we each talked about our research. And again, so I'm crossing borders into the world of genomic biology. And they were talking about SNPs and other things. And I was like, okay, so tell me again, like a SNP is what? And okay, so tell me this again. And sometimes I'll say I was bold to interrupt the meetings. And other times, Gene, the director, if we were sitting together, he would turn to me, okay, it's this, it's that. But I'll tell you, the university had a study in a second discipline. And so I took that on genomic biology. And so Gene and I, we were at another event And we were talking and he was saying something. I was like, I know it is, I didn't say it like that. Well, maybe I did. I was like, oh yeah, it's this, and that. And then we were talking and he said something else. I was like, oh, it's this, and that. Then he kind of looked at me. He's like, oh, okay. So I don't have to like translate anymore. I'm like, nope, I have this. So that's what I mean. There's collaborations where you don't work with people at all. You spend time to learn the language, and there's some level of discomfort, right? Depending on how comfortable you are with letting people know you don't know, right? Like, I do not know. I have to stop this meeting. You all are on something. Bring it to my level, right? I had to do some of that, but then I went and got additional training, and Jean actually was my mentor doing that. So some of the things that we did, initially we did focus groups, because again, this was the time when I was hearing about the violence, and I maybe I was naive, I don't know, but I thought since they tore down public housing that things kind of calmed down some, but maybe I was here in the bubble, right? I was in Champaign-Urbana in the bubble, although gun violence is a big issue in town here now at this moment. And so we did focus groups, and we said, you know, like, what's the issue? We talked to men, women, and children, and yes, violence was a big deal. And we knew we wanted to try to see how their genome, the immune system was affected. So we asked during the focus group, if someone came to you and said they wanted to draw some of your blood, what should they do? How should we react? And we were Black women, but we knew the racism, right? We knew the exploitation would impact how people saw it. So we did that. Then we came back and interviewed about 96 women. We did surveys, we did scales on depression, PTSD. We looked at census data, the crime reports. We had a phlebotomist. We went through the training and collected 5 mLs of their blood, and did Google Street View, where we took their address and looked and coded how many buildings were abandoned, and things like that. And I'll say that the project started slowly. And then one day I went in there, it was at the YMCA on 64th and Cottage Grove. And we chose that because it was a woman-centered space. And the place was packed. It was in the middle of winter, it was packed, and then there was a long line out the door. And when I was talking to someone, she said, yeah, you know, my friend told me that we could come here and you could talk about your life. They'll ask you about your life and they'll give you $40. And I said, yeah, that's true. And I said, did your friend tell you that we also was asking you for to give us a sample of blood too? And she's like, nah, she didn't say anything like that. But I will tell you that all of the women agreed. There was one woman who didn't feel comfortable. Her and her mom, they left. But everybody else agreed to give their blood. And part of that was because they were having headaches and backaches and stomach aches and wanted to see what was happening. And so I'll say again, to Ebony's point about time and, you know, trying to balance, it took a long time, right, to put all this data together, had the interviews transcribed. Thank you for my many students who worked on this. So we finally recently just published a piece from this about the genomics finding, where the women who perceived that their neighborhoods were not safe had higher levels of glucocorticoid receptors, kind of indicating this chronic stress that was happening, and also wear and tear on the body. And so we, well, first of all, the article was rejected from one journal. Let me give you the whole story, right? And then we submitted it to psychoneural endocrinology. We went through a lot of revisions, a lot of questions, right? And they accepted it. And then we got an email, right? They wanted to make it the editor's choice, and others have picked it up. So it's out there in the world, and there is some tension, right, with genomic biology and Black women. So I'm happy to talk about that too during question and answers. And these are some of the other results in terms of the psychological cost of living in neighborhoods with high levels of violence. About 48% of the mothers expressed depressive symptoms, 56% with PTSD symptoms. And as I mentioned, they talked about the headaches, the backaches, the stomach pains, hair was falling out, things like that. And then another one of the parts of this study is we then receive funding to look at how gun violence affects public life and public health. And this time we were using sensors. We used the Fitbits, but we also used Empatica 12s, I think that they were called. And this is like a heat map of, and it kind of went into the realm of big data where we had the day of the month, right? So we followed the women for about 30 days. And then for about 24 hours, we told them, please just take it off when you're in the shower, right? So we can not break it. And the women were great. This is some of the stuff that they did. And then some of the data that we got from here, right? The shot spotter cameras that captures when gunshots are happening and where they're at. We also got administrative data from 911 about when people call in about hearing shots fired or a person shot. And remember, in certain communities, people not calling because they talked about sometimes the police will come. This is what mothers have said, that they'll knock on the door and say, oh, were you the one that called, and let's get some information. And then the person's like, well, why would you put me out like that, right? So a lot of times people don't call, even when it's anonymous, they just don't feel safe. We also developed what's called our police, it should be crime report. And we envisioned it as a way where women can tell the amount of crime that they've been exposed to. And I'm blanking on, I think we did it in their block radius, just kind of on their block. And this is something that could take the legislators and say, look, right, this is how I'm living. This is what my children are exposed to. What can we do on a policy level? And then we also try to convey our findings in a way where people in the community could get them. So like I said, we published, but we also did this exhibit in community and in the community. And so this is one that we put together about shots fired. And we compared Inglewood to Lincoln Park. So in that 30-day period, when we were looking at this, there were 191 calls about shots fired in Inglewood. And again, remember, a lot of people may hear stuff, but they're not calling. And then there were 42 people shot based on the data. So we used red strings to do that. We were initially thinking about having bullets on the end of the strings, but we didn't want to traumatize people who may have experience with that. So we used these linchpins. And then Lincoln Park, in comparison, in the same 30 days, had 21 calls and 0 people shot. And so we made the point that, let's see, do I have it here? You can't see it, but in the corner, it's an image of a child, and it says, remember from the civil rights era, it said, I am a man. We put, I am a child. And we were trying to say that children live in Inglewood and children live in Lincoln Park. And in both of those communities, children should have the right to grow up without the fear of gun violence or without the fear of death, as we see many children are dying from the gun violence. And then we had computer science students who created virtual reality experiences based on the data. Here they tried to recreate like a neighborhood. The stoplight showed when calls came into 911 for people being shot or hearing gunshots. We had a garden that shows the mothers. It was like 12 participants and their sleep and wake cycle. The mothers talked about how it was hard at night to go, some of them, to go to sleep because their mind were revved up, right? Like the bills, the crime, the violence, all of it. And then sometimes even the physical environment, there were police cars going all hours of the night, and it was hard to sleep in that sense too. Oh, here's the I Am a Child that we had displayed at the exhibit as well. And there are some more numbers about shootings and other things that we put with that. And now moving to the big data research. And I put this here, so I was invited to talk about this quite a bit. And I always started with this slide just to show how interdisciplinary this project was. We worked with someone in computer science, African-American studies, gender and women's studies, a visualization programmer, someone from started here, but then later transferred, who was like a humanist, right, digital humanities librarian. I mean, it was really interdisciplinary. And this was done with funding from Exceed from NSF that went to the National Center for Computing Applications. And it gave us, I think we were at the table sitting for like 3 years. And so when I talk about what's needed, funding for people to come to the table to pay the computer visualization specialists money, as social scientists sat around the table and humanists and said, okay, this is how we would like to see the data. How do you make that happen, right? That requires people to have the time dedicated to do that. And so we started kind of with the word clouds, right? And then we also wanted to test, could our method, oh, yes. Oh, we also wanted to test if our methods could kind of be reflected in what's happening in the world. So this is one example of it. We did topic modeling, and again, I was at the table. Okay, tell me topic models. It's like a bag of words that they appear together. Okay, so tell me again. And so this topic model, the words that were coming up were property, estates, court, law. And so as a group, we coded individually, then we came together to talk about it. And so we all agreed that it was something about legal battles, court, and property. But we weren't clear if they were actually talking about physical property or were they referring to slaves. And so our question was, are Black female slaves taking cases to court? Is this what's coming up when we search? I'm sorry, I should tell you, we searched 800,000 documents from 1740 to 2014 to try to get information. And so we found, when we went just kind of looking at historical information, that by 1846, there were 575 freedom lawsuits, and about 60% of the time that the slaves won. So they talked about this as the golden age of those lawsuits. And here, Sojourner Truth was an example of that, where her son was sold illegally and she went to court and won. So we were excited in that our big data methods were actually referring to what we believe was referring to something that was happening in the lives of Black women and showing Black women's agency. Because another finding from this was that writing definitely was an act of privilege, that many times in order to get women's experiences, we had to go through white men, white women, or even sometimes Black men. And one example is a physician was writing about a child. The mother brought the child had, I think, diarrhea for like a year, but then stool, blood started appearing in the stool. And so the mother brought the child in, and all of that came from the physician, right? We didn't have the mother's voice. And they talked about the child was poor and in ill health, like typical, right, Negro children were, and they referred them to a charity hospital. So we have to take the mother's experience of, for whatever reason, not bringing the child in, or she didn't bring it to that hospital for a year, and then something triggered her to go and seek help. And you can imagine what the help was like based on kind of how they wrote about it. And then after all that, she was outside of her element, maybe race and class, and they referred her to the hospital where the Black people go. So we got that again from the physicians' voices, not the mothers. And then another visualization, we wanted to try to, the different topics, try to see how they link together and how some of the words may appear in different places and in different historical times. And so this was one that we were like, well, can you make it do this? Well, can we click on it and can we do this? And so the person, Mark Van Moor, was just wonderful. And he was working with us, whatever we could imagine, right? He would create it as a data visualization, as an interactive thing. And then this is one, we broke it up into times, right? The abolition of slave importation, the Nat Turner Rebellion, Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? With that reading was supposed to be transformative regarding slavery. So we looked at writings supposedly by and about Black women during those times. And then this one is also more complicated. It was a computer science student who worked on this kind of innovative way to look at the data across different periods, and then where you can click on and get a sense of what some of the topics were. And this is Nini that she created, and she called it the interactive tree maps. And so let's see, I'm trying to see what came out of this. I just want to give you a sense, right? Oh, one interesting thing that came out was I actually received, someone told me it was one of the highest awards in computer science. And you know, when it's not your discipline, you don't have a sense of what it's like. And I was just telling him, he's like, you know, that's one of the biggest awards. I was like, no, I didn't know. So that came out of it. And again, it's not me, right? It's the interdisciplinary nature. I mean, it's me, but it's also the interdisciplinary nature. And then, as I said, I've been invited to do key talks about this. And computer scientists often in the room say, I didn't know our methods and our data could be used for these social issues like that. So they were really intrigued by that. I was invited to New Zealand to talk and to present for people working with the Maori people. And I talked to them this idea about recovering lost history and trying to use computer methods and text mining and other ways to look at that data. And so that relationship and going to speak then led me to be introduced to Kelly Nolan, who invited me to do a keynote, but then also as part of that, she's been helping me with resources. And part of that was having a team, work with us to get the over, it should be 12 million tweets. And we're looking at that now. And we've done 2 publications now. But as I said, when I get the research scientists, we hope to do more. And again, this, you know, trying not to work yourself into a fit of sickness, right? But to try to balance. And I'm really excited when that person starts, where we can start putting more of this out. And then it also led to, I believe, a $300,000 grant from NSF to train young people and give them exposure to computer science, which is what I'm doing now. So here's just one data visualization. You know, I'm a visual person, so I love the data visualizations. And this is going to be part of the, I'm giving a talk for the American Sociological Association around Black death. And so this is one of them with the police killings and other types of race-related killings, and how the big words, right, that jump out are stop killing us. But then also there's resiliency, and that there are tweets about love and peace, and tweets about how, and Twitter, right, here are some resources for those who are protesting and getting arrested. You know, hashtag so-and-so is raising money to pay people's bail. So it's really interesting what we're finding with that. And okay, so impact of my research on well-being of young people. Let me look at the time. Okay, so I want to show this clip. Stephane Clark's aunt is talking here. And when she talks, what she's talking about is his brother, younger brother, was at a court hearing. He jumped up on the desk, and some people would say was acting out. But she's making the point, these young people are hurting, they are in trouble, and that's what you see, and what are we going to do about that? And this other clip is a documentary that we're working on for mothers who've lost children to gun violence. And I don't think I have time to show it. It's a few minutes, but I just want you to know it's out there. It's called What's Left Behind. And if you search by Lisa Butler, I think it may come up more faster with her name. She's the director, and I'm one of the co-producers of it. But I do want to show this to set the context for kind of what my work hopefully will do for young people.
His brother, Stephane,
Can you all hear it okay?
is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Stephane has lost 2 of his brothers. I was over at Stephane's gravesite yesterday, where he is buried on top of his 19-year-old brother. Stephane has lost his older brother. He has lost his baby brother. And he is losing some of his mind. And while everyone has something to say, while everyone wants to talk negative, this is why this baby says, we need a resource center. Where are the mental health professionals in our community? He needs help. What you see is not rare. It just had to happen this way, because every every single day, there is a child that looks just like Stevante, who is running around here, who looks half crazy to the world, but you don't know the damage that's done inside. We are living in communities that are like war zones. You don't know what it's like to go to the home that you grew up in and feet from the couch you lay on. Your brother was murdered in his grandmother's backyard. You don't know the pain that his grandfather feels from hearing him knock down for help. Let's take our outrage, but let's use it for something positive. He will not be another name added to a list. We're too strong. We're too united. And it is time for things to change.
Whew, every time I hear that, I'm affected the same. Just
His brother
interesting.
Stevante
Hold on one second.
is
Okay. Okay, so,
Ruby, this is Ebony. I think we do have time to listen to a couple of minutes of the other.
oh, okay,
Yeah, let's
sure. Thank you for letting me know.
absolutely.
It was about 4 o'clock in the morning. I knew it was a bad call simply because of the time.
I had to work that day. I worked the overnight shift at the time. And I was sitting in my bed watching TV. And I told Gerard, stay in the house.
And he was like, oh, Uncle Julian, I'll be right back. That never happened.
Scared. I was scared to death.
I have some bad news, and it doesn't look good. By the time I was running out the house, I see my cousin Tiara. She was at the corner, and she was like hysterical. I prayed that he was just hurt.
And so you get down there and what happens?
I arrived on 67th Street. No police officers there would answer my questions. Then the police came and they roped off the area. They're like, can I help you, ma'am?
I said, wait a minute, I'm his mom. Let him hear my voice.
So by the time I got to the corner, that's when I saw he was under a sheet.
I was just thinking, how he gone and I'm still here. That's not right.
And I used to hear the childbirth was the worst, but no, it's the ultimate anguish that you can feel.
But I was trying to suppress the screams. I couldn't stop myself from screaming.
What became clear to me, even though you get a lot of different outcomes when someone is exposed to trauma, is that it can really be very harmful to you psychologically.
And so after that, I just felt like I didn't want to live. Because my thing was the world was supposed to stop when my son got killed. See, I was confused. I thought the world was supposed to stop. And what's your son's name?
Damien.
My son's name is Thomas Lee. My son's name is Corey Parker. My son's name is Raymond W. Pryor IV. My son's name is Kenneth Anthony. I'm the mother of Gerard Benton. My son is Ashton Simpson, and he was murdered September 13th, 2015.
Thank you for cueing me to play that. And also I'll say the young boy from Chicago, Malik Muhammad, who wants to play classical music at this, I have been thinking for years, right? Since I listened to these mothers and the pain, and often the pain stays for a long, long time. Was there some kind of rituals that we could have to decrease the amount of pain for the families? And you heard them talk about when they go to get to their babies, right? Everybody referred to their child, grown or not, as their babies. That often the police stood between them. And I often thought about what rituals could we have where there was this, right, they talked about, let him hear my voice. I want him to know that I'm there, that we give them the space to do that. So I'm thinking about that with Malik. Again, he's going to lead it, but this is kind of in the back of my mind, and what can we do as a community? So part of that is we're working on a paper now about adverse childhood experiences over the life course. I'm out speed up. Adverse childhood experiences over the life course, and the mothers, right, who answered the questions, about 57% reported struggling with money in childhood. And again, goes back to Cook County, goes back to the Robert Taylor community. About 22% of the mothers reported being abused or molested. About 41% of them talked about witnessing someone being shot as a child. Can you imagine, as a mother raising a child who saw someone else shot? And the mothers, some of the mothers said they didn't even tell their mothers, right? So their mothers may not know, they may be reacting to stress or may have PTSD, and the parents don't even know what's happening. And still a staggering number when we talk about excess death, about 36% reported the death of a parent during childhood. And so this image, again, when I talk about things that we create, I was telling, these are medical students, Samantha and Kanisha, they're working with us. And I said, we have to try to create something visually, so when the mothers in Inglewood and others get the paper, they'll be able to see their experiences. They'll be able to understand what we're saying. So we spent a lot of time trying to convey this image of how you can have experience, and not saying if you have these experiences, this is what's going to happen, but if you have these experiences, it could influence that these other things would happen, right? So the sexual abuse, witnessing of a crime, and the fear of police, as we know from what's happening now, how that can affect you throughout your life course and can affect your level of depression, anxiety, thyroid imbalances, obesity, and then how that affects the glucocorticoid receptors and how they function. And with normal stress levels, they're like, okay, I got this stress, we got it. But when it is chronic and the system becomes overloaded, and then those are some of the ways that sickness and excess death happen. So this image really is for the mothers and for others, hopefully one way to break it down. Because I'll tell you, even when I read the genomics article now, I can barely understand it. So that's some things that we try to do. And then again, just social determinants of health. I talk a lot in the medical school with this diagram. It was at a NIH event I was at, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love it, because all of the social determinants of health, that's what I do, right? I know about that. So physicians and others are always curious to see that when people come into the office, right, doctor's office, those things are what they're complaining about, but it's a whole iceberg of things that's driving it. And that's where we need to also put attention to getting at those social determinants of health. And I appreciate the note in chat before, right? I think about Rothenbrenner, his ecological system, and that you have a child, and then they're affecting the family. And that always struck me with Rothenbrenner's theory, is that the child has agency, right? If it's an active child, then the parents are trying to roll with that. And, you know, if you're in a good environment, hopefully parents roll with it, or I shouldn't say good. Some environments, parents roll with it more than others, I'll say that. And I have had an active child, and it is something, right? Like you trying to tell them one thing and they are doing their own thing. And you are like, uh-oh, right? Like, that's a whole nother question. But also I want to point out, one of the things in terms of children and adults that we want to do with this idea of third reconstruction is to change the shape of the ball. I was at an NSF workshop, and they talked about this research, and they said it's like the squishy ball where you apply the pressure, but once the pressure is gone, it goes back to its original shape. And that's what I think happens often. But as I'm trying to talk about this third reconstruction renaissance, how do we create new shapes in terms of society? And I'm gonna speed up a little more. The last thing I'll say for kids is that we have a physical space here in Champaign-Urbana and Lincoln Square Mall that we call the Communiversity Wellness Center, where it really is the space where people from the community and the university can come and exchange knowledge, and where this community science will take place, especially now that we're opening up. We have the Nobel Project that I talked about that was funded by NSF, and they are going to be trained to be community health workers. So we're really excited about that. The last part, Reconstruction Science, is an elite space. When I teach students, I'm like, you are in an elite space. When I'm at the meetings with the College of Medicine, I talk about this is an elite space, and part of the community science is to expand it, right? To put science in the hands of those who are already, they have knowledge, they have the expertise, they're doing everyday theorizing and working together. One example is Bertha Purnell in Chicago, who's working with mothers, families who've lost children to gun violence. And when I talk to her, the amount of information she is getting from all of those parents, and in little ways when she's working with them, going to identify bodies, when she's going to buy shoes for the funeral that one of the relatives need, when she's going to one of the funeral homes almost interrupted the funeral because the parents couldn't pay for it, and she went and was calling, right? All of the stuff she's doing, that's Black agency, that's resiliency, that's trying to survive, and I don't even know if I can say thrive in the midst of structural oppression. And how do we get her knowledge, right, into what I'm calling this tree of knowledge, right? How can her hands be a part of it? Let's see, I just want to speed up because I do want to really have this interaction. So here I just put in terms of computer science, right? Like flat in terms of having Black women in it and other groups, and how can we make the curve look like that, right? How can we make it grow exponentially? And this is one of my images that I love so much. This is one of the mothers, the citizen scientists who was talking at the exhibit that we did when I showed you the streams. And later I was like, okay, so how does it feel to be a citizen scientist? And she said, I think of myself as the data. And I was like, oh, and I was trying to like think and to say stuff, you know, I was up all night with the exhibit. And she said, well, you're trying to change things around? I was like, yeah, we're trying to change things around. So even after they worked with us for 30 days, we used the language of citizen scientists and all of that, she said she still saw herself as the data, because that's the culture, right? Like that's in the academy, that's what we do. We take them from the data. So as she said, that's what I'm trying to change things around. And then here's, as I mentioned, the Du Bois exhibit with the Sociological Association. Here's an image using the colors that Du Bois used around death by suicide among Black youth in Chicago. From 2014 to 2020, it was like 33 youth. And then we have these white dots, and those are young people under 12 years of age and younger, who had death by suicide, right? So that really is letting us know something. This is from resiliency with the mothers, how they talked about quiet. They go into their homes, they go into the bathroom, they go into the shower, and they start to say, okay, this is the situation, what can I do about it? So this is really the themes that came from that. We wanted to show that in a beautiful representation of Black women. And this is the image that I showed you before. And this is my last slide, I think. Again, this idea of community science is really trying to eliminate barriers, having unprecedented access where community stakeholders are at the tables, are at the policy clinic table, the university tables, the medical school tables, and their knowledge is welcome. It's a part of that. It's what's brought together in that mixture. And maybe that's adopting an entire school, an entire community, and working with individuals. And then I love the word Renaissance, right? Because again, it captures the artistic way, and art can hit people in ways sometimes that words can't. But also Renaissance is this intense period of both intellectual and artistic activity. And that's the mother, uncle, sister, brother, cousin in the ecosystem. So that's also what I mean when I talk about community science. So, and then this is hopefully one day, right, I'll be doing some big data with social networks. When people are killed, what happens to the social network, cities, spaces. I want to try to do something about these 31, visualize 31 children shot. Where were they? What were they doing? Again, to highlight that issue. And then, of course, big data, predictive models. What can we predict? And again, not just to know, but to think about how do we prevent and foster health and wellness. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for your attention.
Wow. Wow. You make me feel like I'm a doctoral student all over again. I have so many questions, but I have got to privilege, our scholars in this moment. But if there's any dead space, I'm coming in. I'm coming. So who would like to start with our first question?
I think Cynthia had her hand up.
Oh, yes, Cynthia, please. Thank you.
I was clapping, but
Oh,
since you called on me, I will just throw this out there. This is one of those annoying, not a question questions, super quick. My dissertation work was on children of incarcerated parents, and we did hair cortisol in those kiddos with a parent in jail. And I guess maybe we'll turn it into a question in terms of that. Going out and explaining and asking for literally a piece of someone's body. I gave some kids their first haircut, and to be honored to be in that space. Could you talk a little bit about, one thing I love is your connection with seeing people not just as research subjects, but really as part of an overall change effort in addition to kind of a research. Can you talk a little bit about that piece of it?
Yeah, that's a really big part of it. And I mean, from the design, like I said, we wanted a space that was female centered. That's why we did the Y. We had snacks, but once we saw, again, in terms of poverty, like the women would come hungry, their children were hungry. So we started just like having entire meals. And that, when you create this ecosystem, right, when things like this happen. So the thing that happened is a mother came in, had a black eye, her lips were bruised, had a big bruise on her lip. And we were like, maybe today isn't the best day. We'll be here next week, maybe you can come back. And she was insisting that she wanted to talk to us. And so we said, okay, tell you what, we found out they had counseling, right? Because we intentionally wanted a space for women. So the Y offered counseling, they talked to her, and then we asked them, like, do you think it's okay? We don't want to exploit or, with the money. And it's like, yeah, if she wants to do it. So she did it. And I will tell you, how some people just transform your life? Like, she transformed it, and just all of the challenges that she was under, but also the resiliency and her sense of humor. So that's one thing. And then again, when we went and we asked the women for their blood, we had the conversation. We said, you know what? We understand racism in the US, and we understand from Tuskegee to Harriet, Henrietta to like all, we broke it down. And we said, but this is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to understand the stress and the level of things that you have to deal with, that how it affects you, but how it affects other Black women. And then we want to try to create programs to address that. So I think that was what people heard, because like I said, they told us about the pain and the, these aches and other things, and they wanted to know, right, what was going on with their body. So those are some of the ways for us also to be vulnerable and to talk about our lived experience. And we talked about it and shared it, and we cried, like the transcribers had to transcribe when we were crying, right? Like the wording to stop because we're just there crying over it. But there was also a lot of laughter. So I'll say in those ways.
Excellent. Other questions?
I have a question if I can.
Absolutely. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Mendel, for everything. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I look forward to reading more. I did want to ask you, you mentioned something about asking the women for their blood and things of that nature. When it comes to your team, I think about that insider outsider perspective. Do you think that it helped? I'm assuming you spoke to them. But do you think that it helped, and do you think they saw you as an insider when it came down to that?
Yes, I think it did help. Like all of the women were Black. We had one Latina who worked with us. And I think that the way that we approached it, approached the women, gave them some level of comfort. Again, especially since we talked about, we know the abuse and that's not where we're trying to come from, right? And I think that also put them at ease. So I think that was a big part of it. And so sometimes people ask, like, do we feel like that there may have been some limitations of that? And it could have been like, maybe there are questions that someone outside of the experience would not have asked. But I'll tell you one thing I do say, one of the limitations, even though I was a Black woman, I am not raising I have 2 Black boys. I'm not raising them in Inglewood. And I tell people, even when I'm presenting it, my mind isn't saying, okay, where are my kids? Like, okay, I talked to them at 9 o'clock. Are they okay? Oh, it's just a mass shooting here. 4 people are killed. I saw the police, right? My mind isn't doing all of that. So in some ways, we can't represent the data like they can. And that's why their voices needs to be here. And I talk a lot about citizen scientists, but they're not working with me in the way that I want them to, that intimate, right? Like, to write an article, all you have to do, but they need to be compensated to do work like that. But so in those ways, I think it did help. But even though I'm a Black woman, class, right? Talk about intersectionality, class and location. I haven't raised my kids like that.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, so someone else is saying they were thinking about the role of identity, positionality. Yes. And
Yeah.
I saw earlier comment about the big data, the complexity, about community impact. Yeah. And that's why I said even the computer scientists were like, oh, right? Like, I didn't know you could use these topic models and stuff to think about Black women, like how they were trying to be free and still trying to be free. But that's also too what's motivating the community, the citizen scientists and community health workers to also get their knowledge in the digital records so that people can go back and see what they were experiencing.
Maria, do you want to ask your question out loud or shall I read it?
I can ask.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. Mendenhall.
Hi.
I loved your talk.
Thank you.
So I am a biomedical engineer by training, and that means that I know all about interdisciplinarity, but I struggle with identifying what my expertise is. So I wanted to ask, like, how do you focus on what your expertise is when doing such interdisciplinary work? How do you know when to call in somebody else for their expertise?
Yeah.
And then how do you decide who to share your ideas with?
Yeah, that's great. So I think it starts with the question, right? Or, right, so how the big question that I was asking for a long time, even before I met Jean Robinson at the Institute for Genomic Biology, how does stress get under the skin to affect health? And that question partly came from the documentary Unnatural Causes, Is Inequality Making Us Sick? Have you all seen that, right? And when they showed, and I have the slide, but I didn't put it in this talk, an airplane, right, falling out the sky, because they talked about the 83,000 excess Black deaths is the equivalent of a plane full of African Americans falling out the sky every day, every year. And that thing touched me, and I was like, what happens? Like, what happens that makes us have this excess death? So that was the question. And then I said, okay, right, like I know a lot about racism, racial trauma, racial microaggressions, but the biology part, I don't know, right? Let's see what other people are doing. So when Jean came looking for me, I was also searching. So that what is that, the Rumi quote? That which you are seeking, searching is seeking you, or something like that. So that's one way where you kind of get your name out. Also at the university, we're thinking of having a portal. If you're interested in this type of research, here are all the people working on it. So that's one. And then in terms of the expertise, I'll tell you, the thing about interdisciplinary work is, especially with the big data project, right? The data visualization person was here. We were here with Black lived experience, Black feminist theory. And then there was a point in the meeting where he said something, we were kind of stumped like, oh, how should we think about this? And he's like, well, I think based on this and this. And we all kind of turned and looked, and the knowledge was transferred, and that he was able to incorporate his data science, but he also knew the lens we were looking, and he gave us something new. That's what I'm talking about, this new space that you enter with interdisciplinary work. So who to share with? I will say, I've been fortunate that I know of, like I freely talk about my ideas, and even I've worked on some projects where it's my idea, but I don't have time, again, to Ebony's point, right? Like you just don't have, and I give it to the people. I'm like, okay, the part is liberation, the part is trying to help the Black community. So if you get funded, right, you know, color me something in there, but you know, take it. So for the most part, I do give the ideas, but I understand, right, in terms of publishing. But I think that's been my experience. I'm trying to make sure I'm telling you, right, what I really did. Yeah, I think that's been my experience, to just kind of share. If they're working on something, this is what I'm doing. Do you want to share? If not, okay, right? Like, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Ronnie has a question, but while she's asking her question, when you think about discipline, for me, particularly think about computer science. Well, I'm in engineering education, and engineers are not really checking for me until they need someone to work on a research project. So I'm really interested in how you got computer science to value you and value the work that you do. But I think that can also be encompassed in Ronnie's question. So Ronnie, did you want to say it, or do you want me to just read it for you?
I think you nailed it. Yeah, it's really, how did you go about creating and sustaining the interdisciplinary teams, particularly between the social sciences and the STEM folks? Because all you said gave me life, Ebony. I do a lot of interdisciplinary work, and I said, and then that really creates the level of synergy that's required to move something forward. Yeah. I'm not even going to talk about authorship and publication. That's a whole nother thing. What discipline does things go in? But just how did you create and sustain these partnerships to minimize the barriers and to facilitate the progress? I know that's a big question, but that's my question.
So that's great. So I'll give you a little background with the Big Data Project. So it started, I'm trying to see the very start of it. Michael Simeone, who worked at NCSA, I can't remember, we had conversations before, but I invited him to come and talk to my students in social and the methods class, because I felt this computational data and those methods would be important, although social wasn't checking for those methods, right? And sometimes still aren't checking. And so I had him come because I thought it would be important in the future and our students should know about it. So during the talk, I was writing those fast and furious. I was like, oh, could I answer this question? Could I answer that? And so for the first year he came, we had 30 minutes of conversation, talked about it. The second time he came, another 30 minutes. And he said, you know what? NCSA has this faculty fellowship. So one is that there has to be infrastructure in the departments or in the units where they are reaching out for interdisciplinary research. And NSF funded that with Exceed, right? So the funding was built in. We applied, we didn't get it the first time because it was more focused on the Black mothers, and I think like 25, and there's like, no, right? Like you have to come with some data. So we came the second time with this idea of the searching all of these documents. And then, as I said, computer science, Michael was there, so he reached out to his friends. And then the reason they could sustain their involvement was that their salary was being paid for by NSF. And then when the timing was up, like a year and a half into it, they had an extended money that we could use to keep the computer scientists and other at the table. But I will say the ones that we worked with, they were interested. They had, hey, baby, they never worked with anyone like me, right? They were looking at, what is it, like the stars and kind of doing that stuff. So they were like, oh, okay, this will be interesting. But they put everything in it. So I would say I wonder if there are some computer scientists who are interested in this, but again, the funding doesn't allow them to kind of branch out and look at it. So Ebony, does that get it? Like, so one, it was funding that paid their salary that allowed them to be at the table. Another was we had these conversations where they presented their work, and I was like, can we do this? Can we do that? And they saw how it could help. And I will say, another computer science, I was talking about my research, and he allowed one of his graduate students to work with us, like, you know, paid for almost like 2 years. And so I think part of it may be, and you all may have done this, so you can let me know if you did, to talk with them and to see, like, one, it helps them with diversifying their department, helps them with pathways. If your computer science department is like the one here and other places, right, that's something that they desperately need. And people really should be calling them on it, and putting up numbers, talk about data visualizations, right? Put up charts with 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 year after year. What you gonna do about this, right? So, and that's one way, right? I think about critical race theory and interest convergence. You all are interested in diversifying. You may not want to put the time and energy into it, but that's our gift, right? The earlier question, how do you know what to bring to the table? That's what you're bringing to the table, right? Like people of color, the theories. You give us the resources, we work together, and hopefully there's transformation in that. And publications, right? Because publications is another thing, and where you publish and all of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Also, I feel re-energized because even with the interest conversions, it seems as though white supremacy trumps innovation and invention, you know? And you're just giving me a lot of hope that maybe I'm coming about this thing the wrong way, you know? So I'm gonna try your strategy.
And ask, go in there and ask for resources. Like, we know that you would like to diversify the department because that's part of a society, that's part of science, right? And the NSF, if you want to put in the NSF is looking at convergence accelerators, and we know you want to be at the top. And so here are some ideas we have, right? Like, we feel if you donate, I don't know, a grad student, 10% of the faculty time to do this, and then these are some of the products. And then just kind of see. And then even if it's a no, are you sure, right? Like, you know, like there should be some way that you can sell it in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of social unrest, in the middle of all that other stuff, right? So.
Right.
Yeah.
I see Dr. Johnson has joined us. Hello, Dr. Johnson.
Hi, how are you?
You know, I am so happy. I've been talking about Ruby Mendenhall for a year now. And it is so great to see one of the true Renaissance figures within the social sciences excelling and being appreciated for her brilliance. So I wanted to congratulate you on your recent promotion to full professor. Yes. And
thank you.
And hint, there are people looking at you. So we've had some conversations, and I just know that you're going to do tremendous work and really continue to kind of transform the way we think about our disciplines. Because one of the things that I noticed when I went to the website to, you know, within my report I had to give to the administration about Mendenhall, yeah, I was like, you know, she's in these places and she's positioned to bring all of these different perspectives to bear on critical questions that affect Black people, right? And it's unusual to see someone being able to have those communications that you just mentioned. So I actually came in on the tail end of you describing how that kind of happens. So I want to thank you for that bit of information. So I'm sure I missed a wonderful keynote, and I'm definitely going to look at the recording. I unfortunately had a dissertation that I couldn't get out of, and it wasn't my student, so I was feeling kind of salty about it, but nonetheless, it was a great defense, so I can't complain too much. But thank you for being here, and let me stop rambling.
Oh, no, and I want to thank you. I mean, and your research as well. And right, we've been kind of talking over the years, and it's been amazing. And I'll add to that. And I'm only adding to let people know, like, the journey hasn't always been easy, but now, so I have been promoted to full, but also an endowed chair, which is something I never thought that I would be, right? I always looked at people with endowed chair and said, oh, okay, that's, you know, but so now it's here, and it's quite interesting, especially since a lot of my work was in the community, and there were questions, right, kind of about that. And so literally I almost had to have the community part and the science part, right, like equal measures, which was exhausting again to Ebony's part, right? Like, but I felt, what can I do? I'm not going to come here and not think about the community and not link my work to the community, although that took some extra time and effort. So I appreciate it. And I don't take that Renaissance title lightly, right? Like, I appreciate that. So yes, thank you. Thank you.
But I like how you going big or going home. You said the third Reconstruction.
I was like, Renaissance, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
You
and have policymakers, right? Like, let's look at this policy. What can we do? And a lot with Biden, right? With the Biden administration, there's a lot of things in there. The Illinois Legislative Black Caucus here, they passed 4 laws, anti-racism laws, right? So let's unpack that. The resources are here. How can we make sure they get to the community? How can we make sure these universities are transformed? How can we make sure health and wellness is in our communities versus, I started with Black death in Chicago, right? They had a mass shooting, right? Versus things like that. So we don't have a choice, right? Like, we do not, our lives are in the balance. So, yeah.
So we want to end with a couple of more scholars. You know, I had the Spencer students before, but some more scholar feedback or questions. Anybody? So I guess I'll take the liberty and ask the last question. When you decide to embark on a new trajectory where there's a learning curve for you, how do you make those decisions? Like, the learning curve is just too steep, or the politics are too deep. I'm not going to choose this opportunity, but this other opportunity, you know, might be good. What's the decision-making process?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I'm in the midst of that now. So again, with the National Center for Supercomputing, and again, I'll say, like, when people see the work that you do, like, different opportunities open up. So there was, again, another possibility for funding, and they asked, was I interested in applying? And it was for a geospatial Institute fellowship, right? And I was like, ooh, okay, let's see. And I was like, well, you know, I am interested in space and neighborhoods, and COVID-19 was just starting. So I was like, okay, I'm interested in that. And so I received the fellowship, and then I was at the training where the person was literally like coding and writing the language and coding. And I talked earlier about how I had to stop meetings and like, okay, so tell me, like, a SNP in terms of the DNA is what. So I had to say, okay, so tell me again, like, this code is, and how do you do the code? And there was a moment, and I know this is being recorded, but there was a moment when I was like, uh-oh, I crossed another border that's going to be really something, right? But what I did was I said, okay, Ruby, like, you know, you don't have to understand it today. You know, but take your notes, that it's being recorded. And then I tell you, we had a meeting today. I was like, uh-oh, here we go. But what I did at the meeting, I was like, okay, so again, so tell me, I said, bring it to me like the 6th grade level. And we're hoping to have some students work with us too. And so they did, right? And I would say, okay, so are you saying this and that it's like this and that we're going to digitize it and look at it like that? And I think that I understand it. But then what I said was, can you write your methods, right? Like what you're doing, can you write it so that anyone can pick it up and understand? And I think between the conversation and their methods and the visualizations, that I'll understand it, because what we're doing is looking at the 1918 Spanish flu. And is that the right term? I hope I'm not like saying the incorrect term, but the flu in the 1918 and how Blacks passed away, had higher death rates, and then linking that to COVID-19 in terms of spaces, and talking about as people migrated north, that inequality followed them. And even 100 years later, it's still here with COVID, and you can see it. So again, what are we going to do as a society in terms of policy and other things to make sure the next big pandemic or whatever doesn't have the same consequences? So that was a border crossing that I crossed. There was a point in the meetings, I was like, oh my God, I started shrinking. I was like, I can't learn code, I can't. And then I had to calm down and say, you know, you don't have to learn it, right? Like just understand it to some degree. So that's kind of how we do it. And sometimes you don't even know when you accept the mission, like how much you may have to be stretched. And the thing is, fearless, right? When Gene Robinson at the Institute for Genomic Biology asked, who do you know that's fearless? And they said me. I think my personality is like, okay, I am interested in neighborhoods and space and race, and okay, let's see, right? And then, right, but I always have support. That's another thing. I can't digitize the stuff from 1918 and then do the analysis with COVID-19. They allow me to have the infrastructure. That's what funding does. It gives you that infrastructure to do it.
Fantastic.
You know, Ruby, you just, I'm sorry I'm jumping in here, but you said something, you said two things that just kind of, they have to be screened from, you know, all of our mountains with bullhorns, right? I mean, it just can't be overstated or said enough, and that is that infrastructure, right? And that leads me to the first point that epiphany that kind of occurred to me, because I've had similar things. Right now, I'm on the President's AI task force, and so listening to them, and it's a bunch of engineers and a bunch of computer scientists and a bunch of mathematicians, right? That's all that's in the meeting. And of course, I'm the only Black face there. But what I learned is that you have what it takes already, because when you get in there, they're going to recognize concepts, knowledge, frames of knowledge. You have all that you need to then make the connection. You don't have to be the expert.
Right.
What you need to do is be able to understand that you two share concepts. Once you make that bridge, that you know that you are literate in that you all know the underlying issue at hand, you're gonna make that transition.
Yes. Yeah.
But then it takes the infrastructure. They become part of your infrastructure, right? And it's that thing, that connection, that human resource, then that propels you forward. Right. And I just don't think that a lot of these people know their stuff to the point think they know their stuff. They also are relying on infrastructure, and infrastructure of graduate students that go take the latest class and then come back to their lab, right?
Yes.
So to the extent, even they are the ones that are relying on infrastructure. So I think we need to make that point more and more and more.
Yeah.
That we have what it takes.
Yeah, and that with our genius and knowledge and theirs, that something new is created. And without us being at the table and having those awkward moments, right? Because there have been times in collaborations, the tension is kind of high, right? Because we're not talking the same language, and I can tell when people are thinking like, oh, this is too much, I'm gonna take my marbles and go home, right? And then I have to like kind of talk about, okay, now this is what we share, this is what we want to do. And that's a part of it. And even out in terms of students, so I brought a social student with me when I got the grant. And I said, you know, I want you to work with me on this big data project. She was like, big data? I don't know anything about that, right? Why do you want me? But she was an expert in Black feminist theory, and it's Nicole Brown. Google her, right? She is doing amazing stuff in this space of big data and computer science with Black feminist theory. So she created a whole nother discipline, right? So, and also the point is, you can even not be interested, but be curious, right? Because she said, you know, she followed me on some other things, and I didn't lead her astray, right? So she was like, okay. So I would say to even be curious and to get in the space and then be like, oh, my expertise can help you see this, right? I can uncover this. I can tell you how these things are connected, and that there's a space for everybody, but often they're often elite or exclusionary. And that's, I think, when you don't have the science that you need. It may be some type of science, right? But it may not be the science that gets at liberation or health and healing for different groups. It may be science that reproduces inequality. And I fear that's a lot of what we see, especially when you look around the room and who's at the table and who's not at the table. That's a sign. I would just say that's a sign when you look around the room. So,
wow.
Yeah.
You know, we could talk to you for about 5 more hours, like very, very easily, but we don't want to take up any more of your time. We are just thankful for you. I think lastly, if you could just give us in 60 seconds, what if we want to be more involved in community-centered, you know, what if we wanted to be street scholars? Like what would be a good pathway? Like what would be a good first step for that?
Yeah, that's great. I would say, right, if you are interested in working deeply with a community to find either a community agency or someone to really partner with you, and also think about ways you can support them, right? Because you're getting paid as you do that. So think about ways to support them as they work with you. And I would say, even for me, that's a lesson that I'm learning. I talked about the mother who is going to the corners to help mothers identify their children who have been shot and buying shoes. Like, I didn't have that intimacy with a community organization when I first started. And I'm thinking even African-American studies, like we need to create these relationships with those agencies that have very little resources, right? And so I would think that that's a good start. And if I had to do it over again, I would start there. I would start there.
Thank you so, so much for your time, for your energy, for your scholarship, you know, for making our communities better. We are truly grateful.
And I am grateful to you all, because every time I talk about it, I get bolder, right? Because I should be scared to talk about a third Reconstruction. I should be scared to talk about training 100,000 community health workers to flood our communities with health and wellness. But every time I say, and you all give me positive response, that's encouraging. So we'll see. I am scared, but right, what you gonna do?
That's right. You know, most leaders have a little fear, but you don't lead by fear. You lead by instrumental structural change. And I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
Yes. Yes.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, so I'm just grateful. Thank you everyone for your questions, your encouragement, your congratulations. It feels good. Thank you.
Yes, yes. This is a very loving group, you know, very caring folks. So
yeah,
feel the love. Feel the love.
I feel it.
So we want to remind you that this Thursday, we're going to be doing part 2 of our just like, let's just keep it real session. I know that's not the official title, but that's what I'm calling it. I'm having a little bit of tooth surgery on Thursday. I will be there, but my camera may be off. So just warning you. Javon, Otis, did you all have any final comments?
I just want to thank Dr. Mendenhall one more time, and congratulations. And for Thursday, I think Javon has sent out to everyone a change in time, if that's feasible. I mean, we're hoping that 4 is going to work because it has in the past, but we know that the schedule has said 5 o'clock because we made a special accommodation for a guest that is no longer going to be with us. So we can keep it at 4 and have a part 2 like Ebony called it, keeping it real. So looking forward to it.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, you're
Bye-bye.
welcome. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.